We're back, joined by Michael Cutler, a man who has had a rather remarkable and quite extensive career in law enforcement, notably with the Immigration and Naturalization Service for 30 years. He served as an inspector at the JFK airport. He has been involved as a criminal investigator in New York City, also as a representative to the Unified Intelligence Division of the Drug Enforcement Agency. Today, he is a senior fellow at Californians for Population Stabilization. He is a very prolific writer on subjects having to do with his area of expertise, namely immigration, border security, and the mayhem really being wrought at the moment in those spaces. We'll talk more about where you can find his writings in a moment, but let me welcome Michael Cutler back to Secure Freedom Radio. Great to have you with us, sir.
Thank you. Great to join you, Frank. It's always a privilege.
You wrote a recent piece that tracked a sordid legacy, I think it's fair to say, dating back to Jimmy Carter, with respect to sort of the mutation of language. Give us sort of the antecedents and talk about how that's being done today under the Obama administration.
Well, whatever Jimmy Carter did, Obama is out to beat him. I've come to think of Jimmy Carter as Mr. Obama's dementor, if you will. It's out of frustration that I say this. As an immigration agent, we were actually instructed by the Carter administration to cease the use of the term illegal alien to describe aliens illegally present in the United States. It was Orwellian. The term alien has all been expunged from the vernacular when we talk about immigration. Yet there is no insult. This is not the N-word. Alien under our immigration laws, and that's the definition that I will focus on, is simply any person not a citizen or national of the United States. Where in the world is there an insult? It doesn't say someone's immoral, stupid, or smells bad. It simply says you're not a citizen. Statement of fact. But what has been done by using that, then to say that everybody who's a foreign national is an immigrant, so then the claim is falsely made that anybody who dare say we should secure our borders, enforce our immigration laws that are actually our first and last line of defense against international terrorists, transnational criminals, and fugitives, if you dare say we should protect ourselves, then you're labeled anti-immigrant, which of course is a lie. We're simply being pro-enforcement. So this is part of how it's done.
You mentioned that the Obama administration is kind of Carter on steroids. Talk about this new term, calling such folks, these undocumented immigrants, erstwhile illegal aliens, new Americans.
It's astonishing. They can't be a new American if they're here in violation of law. But to be fair about it, we're seeing this from both sides of the aisle. Didn't you have Jeb Bush saying that coming to this country illegally was an act of love? And I would suggest that perhaps he's been looking for love in all the wrong places, you know? But
True.
I knew you would appreciate that.
I do indeed. And the thing is that what is happening here, which makes that Republican buy-in all the more bizarre, isn't it? That we've got a history, going back, I guess, to Carter, of using these immigration flows for, well, gerrymandering, as I think you put it in one of your pieces. And that has real political impact in terms of who is in this country, of course, but also perhaps even who is voting for the leadership of this country or otherwise getting representation in Congress. Talk a little bit about that, Michael Cutler.
Well, first of all, there have been investigations into aliens voting illegally, and they almost always get shut down by both parties, which always astonishes me. I think it's American Express that says membership has its rewards. Don't you think citizenship should have its rewards? But then what do I know? But when Jimmy Carter was the president and we started to do that census, we, the government of the United States, the order came down from the White House. You will not arrest a single illegal alien without getting clearance from headquarters. And just kind of knocked us all on our backsides, and we said, why in the world are we being prohibited from doing our jobs, going out and arresting aliens? And unless you could go through the chain of command, which took forever, and by then you probably lost the trail on the guy you wanted to arrest because it took days, and the guy had 14 arrests and he killed 7 people, they'd say, well, arrest him, but don't dare go near anybody else in that building or his family, just him. And you'd say, why?
And yet, Michael Cutler, I suspect looking back on it, compared to what's happening today, notably with the wholesale release of even criminal
Those were the good old
aliens.
days. Those were the good old days.
The good old days, exactly.
I just want to make one quick point. Sorry to cut you off. We believed it was being done. We didn't realize it at first till we sat down one day over lunch and tried to figure out what we were witnessing. It was about getting more representation into the huge cities where you had most of the Democrat voters. I'm registered as a Democrat. I've always voted as an independent. I'm being nonpartisan, but I am being American on the issue. And the idea that you're telling law enforcement to cease and desist for political objectives puts American lives at risk.
It really does, and we're seeing that in some of these so-called sanctuary cities in particular, but across the country more broadly. Again, our guest is Michael Cutler, now a senior fellow at Californians for Population Stabilization, and a man with a career of law enforcement when he's allowed to perform it, I should say. And your expertise is particularly relevant to the question that I wanted to put to you next, which is, we've been following fairly closely of late the work of Ann Corcoran and Jim Simpson, documenting what's been happening under the rubric of immigration and specifically the refugee resettlement program to sort of take this gerrymandering and migration of problematic new Americans to a whole new level. Give us a flavor of how you see all of that, Michael.
I'm a big fan of political asylum. I'm Jewish. I was named for my grandmother who was slaughtered in Poland during the Holocaust. In fact, as a B'nai B'rith president, I went to Washington back in the days of LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, shows you how old I am, asking him to convince the Russians to let religious minorities, including Jewish people, leave Russia, go to any country that would have them. As an inspector, I was thrilled to admit political refugees. They came here literally crying. They hugged me. They were kissing the floor. It was an amazing emotional experience. But today, that system has zero integrity, just about. And we've seen people like the Tsarnaev brothers who got asylum, and then the whole family immediately jumped on airplanes and back to Russia. If you apply for asylum, you have to make a claim of credible fear. If I go home, I will face persecution or worse, perhaps death. So when someone can say credible fear, and then immediately, without any regime change in their home country, jump on airplanes and voluntarily fly home, you got to believe they lied. Cansey, the guy who shot up the CIA in 1993, kills 2 CIA officers, wounds 3 others from Pakistan, applied for asylum. 1 month later, Ramzi Youssef, World Trade Center bombing, again, applied for and received political asylum. The 9/11 Commission, to which I provided testimony, warned that fraud in the immigration benefits program in general, and specifically within the political asylum program, was providing a gateway for terrorists to enter the United States. It's almost impossible to vet people from war-torn countries, especially when they're hostile to us. And when we bring people in quickly, it's a problem.
This is a whole nother facet of the problem, is that these guys have figured out how to get asylum, as well as, I guess, how to engineer access to the United States through the refugee resettlement program at the behest, basically, or direction, really, of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the UN. Let me switch gears quickly, Michael, because there's another piece of this that I want to make sure we cover, and that is the idea, especially troubling, of bringing in by the tens of thousands, perhaps to Detroit, perhaps elsewhere, of Syrian refugees that the FBI has testified before the Congress they cannot vet, given the lack of background information and identities and so on. As a guy who was at the pointy end of the spear of trying to protect us from these sorts of folks, terrorists among them, jihadists and so on, what should we be thinking and saying and doing about that prospect?
Under no circumstances should we be permitting anybody into our country that we can't properly screen. We're talking about hundreds of thousands. I want everybody to think back to September 11, 2001. And by the way, just so you know, I did my first congressional hearing on May 20th, 1997, 4.5 years prior to 9/11, on the dangers to national security posed by immigration fraud and visa fraud. So my point is this. Americans need to be the first consideration of our immigration laws. They were initially enacted to achieve 2 primary goals: protect innocent lives and the jobs of American workers. We've come so far afield from that. Nobody should be permitted into our country unless we are certain that they don't pose a threat to the safety of American citizens. Is that an unreasonable standard?
Let alone that they might actually be value added to our population. That used to be a consideration too, it seems. We have to let you go, Michael Cutler. We are hard out of time, but thank you for the work you're doing, notably at Family Security Matters.
I got to put one website out, capsweb.org and michaelcutler.net, and thank you for having me, Frank.
You're most welcome anytime, and we look forward to encouraging people to follow you at Front Page Magazine, as well as Family Security Matters, and of course here in the near future, I hope. Next up, Andy McCarthy joins us on whether the president has, lied to the Congress And should he be punished for it? That and more straight ahead.